Wuthering Heights, Emily Bronte's dark masterpiece. On the wild and lonely Yorkshire moors stands a house called Wuthering Heights. It is a place of violent winds, dark emotions, family conflict, love, revenge, and obsession. And from this isolated landscape came one of the most powerful and controversial novels in English literature. Its name is Wuthering Heights. Written by Emily Brontë and published in 1847, the novel tells a story that is much darker than an ordinary love story. At its center are two unforgettable characters, Catherine Earnshaw and Heathcliff. Their relationship begins in childhood. But what starts as an intense friendship eventually becomes a story of love, separation, revenge, and tragedy. Emily Brontë herself lived a relatively private life, far from the literary world of London. She grew up in Haworth, Yorkshire, alongside her sisters Charlotte and Anne, who would also become famous novelists. The Brontë family lived surrounded by the dramatic landscape of the Yorkshire moors. That landscape became an important part of Emily's imagination. The wild weather, empty hills, isolated houses, and feeling of loneliness all seem to live inside the pages of Wuthering Heights. The story begins with a man named Lockwood, who rents a nearby house called Thrushcross Grange. Curious about his mysterious landlord, Heathcliff, Lockwood visits Wuthering Heights. But the house is strange. Its inhabitants are hostile. Its atmosphere is cold and uncomfortable. And during a frightening night, Lockwood experiences something that suggests there is a disturbing history hidden inside the house. He later learns that the story of Wuthering Heights goes back many years. Heathcliff was originally an orphan child brought home by Mr. Earnshaw, the owner of Wuthering Heights. The Earnshaw family already includes two children, Hindley and Catherine. Catherine becomes deeply attached to Heathcliff. The two grow up together on the moors, sharing adventures and developing an intense emotional connection. They seem inseparable. But Hindley hates Heathcliff. After Mr. Earnshaw dies, Hindley becomes the master of Wuthering Heights. He treats Heathcliff cruelly and reduces him from a member of the household to a servant. Despite this, Catherine and Heathcliff remain emotionally connected. Their bond becomes the emotional center of the novel. But everything changes when Catherine meets Edgar Linton, a wealthy and respectable young man from Thrushcross Grange. Edgar represents a completely different world. He offers Catherine security, comfort, social status, and a respectable future. Heathcliff, by contrast, is passionate, wild, poor, and socially unacceptable. Catherine eventually decides to marry Edgar. But her decision creates one of the greatest emotional conflicts in the novel. She believes that marrying Edgar is the practical choice. Yet she also insists that her connection with Heathcliff is something much deeper. Heathcliff overhears part of a conversation in which Catherine says that she cannot marry him because of their differences in social position. He leaves Wuthering Heights. And for several years, he disappears. When Heathcliff finally returns, he is no longer the poor, humiliated boy Catherine once knew. He has become wealthy, educated, and powerful. But he has not forgotten the past. He returns determined to take revenge on the people who have hurt him. His revenge becomes increasingly destructive. He gains control over property. He manipulates family relationships. He takes advantage of the weaknesses of those around him. And most tragically, his desire for revenge affects an entire generation. Catherine, meanwhile, is trapped between the life she has chosen and the emotions she cannot escape. Her marriage to Edgar cannot erase her connection with Heathcliff. The conflict eventually destroys her health. Catherine dies after giving birth to her daughter, also named Catherine. But her death does not end the story. Instead, it deepens Heathcliff's obsession. He cannot accept losing Catherine. He wants her memory to remain with him, even as his hatred continues to shape the lives of everyone around him. The second generation then becomes central to the novel. Catherine's daughter grows up at Thrushcross Grange. She eventually becomes connected to the younger members of the Earnshaw and Linton families. Heathcliff uses these relationships as part of his continuing plan for revenge. But something begins to change. The younger generation is not simply a repetition of the older one. Where the earlier characters are dominated by pride, obsession, anger, and revenge, the younger characters have a chance to break the cycle. This is one of the most important ideas in Wuthering Heights. The novel is not simply about whether two people can be together. It is about what happens when love becomes mixed with possession, pride, social pressure, and revenge. Heathcliff loves Catherine intensely. But his love becomes destructive. His inability to accept loss turns his grief into cruelty. And his cruelty creates more suffering, which creates more resentment, continuing the cycle. Emily Brontë also challenges the idea that wealth and social status determine a person's worth. Catherine is forced to choose between passionate emotional connection and a socially secure marriage. Her decision has consequences that continue long after her death. The novel's setting makes these emotions even more powerful. The Yorkshire moors are not simply a background. They seem to reflect the characters themselves. The landscape can be beautiful, but it can also be wild, dangerous, lonely, and unpredictable. Wuthering Heights feels like part of that landscape. It is a house constantly exposed to powerful winds. And in many ways, the people inside it are just as turbulent. The novel was published in 1847 under the name Ellis Bell. At first, many readers did not know what to make of it. The book was considered shocking because its characters could be violent, selfish, passionate, and morally complicated. It did not present a simple world of heroes and villains. Instead, Emily Brontë created characters who could be both victims and perpetrators. Heathcliff is perhaps the clearest example. We can understand why he becomes angry. He suffers humiliation and rejection. But understanding his pain does not excuse the terrible things he does. That moral complexity is one reason the novel continues to fascinate readers. Over time, Wuthering Heights became recognized as one of the great classics of English literature. Its influence can be seen in countless discussions of romantic fiction, Gothic literature, psychological storytelling, and tragic love. But its greatest strength may be its emotional intensity. Emily Brontë wrote about feelings that are difficult to control. Love that becomes obsession. Grief that becomes anger. Rejection that becomes revenge. And memories that refuse to disappear. At the heart of the story is one haunting question. Can love survive death? For Heathcliff, the answer seems to be yes. But the novel also asks another question. What happens when love refuses to let go? The answer is far darker. It can become destructive. It can trap people in the past. And it can pass suffering from one generation to the next. Yet by the end of the novel, there is a sense that the cycle may finally be breaking. The younger generation begins to find a different path. The anger and hatred that dominated the older characters slowly begin to lose their power. And Heathcliff himself becomes increasingly isolated, consumed by memories of Catherine. His life ends where his obsession began, with the ghost of a love he could never truly possess. That is what makes Wuthering Heights so unforgettable. It is a love story, but not a comfortable one. It is a family drama, but also a psychological study. It is a Gothic novel filled with ghosts, storms, loneliness,